Hello and welcome, welcome. Tis the season for a special holiday edition of Project One Voice Live. I'm your host, Eric McMillan McCall, founder and CEO of Project One Voice. Performances of Christmas music at public concerts, in churches, at shopping malls, on city streets, and in private gatherings is an integral staple of the Christmas holiday in many cultures across the country. On Sunday, December 11th, the Harlem Arts Alliance chairman, Voza Rivers, is proud to announce the return of Harlem Celebrates Harlem this holiday season with the Cecilia Chorus of New York. Mark Shapiro is music director. Together, they will present the Carnegie Hall premiere of The Ballad of the Brown King, a Christmas cantata. This piece is by American composer Margaret Bonds, with text by Langston Hughes and orchestrations by Malcolm J. Merriweather, along with Bach's Magnificat and Part 5 of his Christmas oratorio. The concert will be held on Sunday, December 11th at 2:00 p.m. in Stern Auditorium at Carnegie Hall. Please welcome to Project One Voice Live, my dear friend, my very, very dear friend, Donna Walker-Kuhn, who is founder and CEO of Walker International Communications Group. She will introduce today's Project One Voice Live program all about this special holiday performance at Carnegie Hall. Tony, will you bring Donna in for us?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric, for providing this wonderful platform of Project One Voice for us to really highlight the beauty and the magnificence of the music of African-American composer and Harlem bred Margaret Bond, as well as a wonderful writer and poet, Langston Hughes. We're so delighted to be able to celebrate both of these artists. So welcome to all of our listeners and audience members. This is such a precious moment, and we're really happy that you're able to share this with us. So I am really pleased to introduce our who will be discussing today with the conductor, Mark Shapiro. And Mark is very, very committed to amplifying diverse voices in classical music. So Mark is an acclaimed conductor of orchestras, opera, and choruses with an extraordinarily broad and diverse repertoire. He's built a reputation for exactness in musicianship, fluent and engaging rehearsals, and emotionally and spiritually powerful performances. And he's unique amongst his other North American conductors because he's won 6 ASCAP awards, leading 3 different ensembles. The New York Times has admired his spirit of adventure and praised his work as insightful, while saluting the uncommon polish of his music making. And Opera News appreciated his superb pacing and great confidence. So clearly we have a maestro with us this afternoon. So Mark, please join us. And we want to talk about this wonderful Harlem Celebrates Harlem experience coming up on December 11th.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Eric. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you. Great to see you. Great to meet you in person.
Yes, wonderful to meet you. I love those titles.
Yes.
Yeah, Project One Voice is great.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Mark, if I can begin,
Sure.
Please tell us about the Cecilia Chorus of New York.
Sure, with pleasure. So I am the 7th conductor of the Cecilia Chorus.
Wow.
In 1906. Interestingly, as a women's chorus. At that time, society, kind of downtown New York society, and then became a mixed chorus only in the 1960s. And has been performing at Carnegie Hall since the 60s, maybe about twice a season. And then I've been the music director of the chorus. It was led for a very long time by a fellow named David Randolph, who passed away about 15-ish years ago. And then they had a search and they hired me. So I've been doing this for about 12 years.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And well, tell us about the repertoire. Of course, we know about the Brown Ballad, but what else do you do, and how else do you think it would be of interest to our listeners?
Sure. So the chorus is, I think, in a great space of linking the past to the present to the future.
Okay.
I think in all of my music making, that's what I want to be about. So I think we don't pretend the past isn't there, but we also know the present is here and that the future is ours to create. And those are, beautiful things we do. I know you've worked a lot in dance in particular, and I think dancers, even more than I think musicians, are very aware of working with the past and creating the present and the future. So I think these are beautifully connected activities. Of course, dance has so much movement and rhythm, and I think that's what my own music making, I always want it to be about, how the body is used, how it feels. So Cecilia Chorus, since I've taken over, we've been very focused on, as Eric said, finding some voices that have been overlooked in the past, particularly women, actually.
Okay.
And then also creating new pieces. So we will have, excuse me, in April, a project coming up with a composer named Derek Skye, who's getting quite a lot of attention now. That's we'll be talking to you about that in the days to come. But the current thing is Margaret Bonds. So I was thinking a lot about, we've been very committed to the music of Ethel Smythe, who was an English woman composer, very much overlooked by history, who had a really rough time as a woman. Margaret Bonds, as a woman of color, had a very rough time in this country and wrote about it very poignantly to Leontine Price after. So you mentioned ASCAP and my awards with ASCAP. And I was recently very moved to read what a rough time Margaret Bonds had with ASCAP. So Margaret Bonds in the 1950s was rejected twice by ASCAP and was only voted in on her third try. And she writes about going to her first ASCAP meeting as a full member and seeing that she was the only woman of color, one of the few women and the only woman of color. And she wrote to Leontine Price, who had been singing her music, Leontine Price, the great African-American soprano. And she said, it's so important to me that my music be heard because I feel this enormous sense of responsibility. Very beautiful what she had to say about that. And then this cantata dates from about that time, from the mid-1950s. As you mentioned, the words are by Langston Hughes, and Bonds and Hughes clearly had a very deep spiritual, emotional connection and friendship. They were very happy. This was, I think, probably their most visible collaboration, and they had a lot of success with it in the day, including that it was televised. But in the spirit of our work of looking for things that have been neglected, we discovered it had never been done in Carnegie Hall. Last season, we wanted to be the first group ever to do it in Carnegie Hall, and we did with bits of Handel's Messiah. And then this season, we're doing the first ever performance in Carnegie Hall of the arrangement that my colleague Malcolm Merriweather made of this piece by Margaret Bonds. And maybe now would be a good time also to say she wrote to Langston Hughes after a particularly successful performance of Ballad of the Brown King, this cantata, that their creation deserved to be heard during the Christmas season alongside music by Handel and Bach. So last year we did it with Handel, and we thought, we're going to finish her journey, or at least finish this phase of her dream, and present her in Carnegie Hall with music by Bach. And I've set up behind me a little artwork where there's some Bach and there's the score of the Bonds and the postcard for the concert. But there's Margaret Bonds and Bach side by side there.
Wow. That's really incredible. Thank you, Mark, for that important historical background on how this collaboration came about and the relationship of Margaret Bonds and Langston Hughes. We don't hear about that. So you've given us a really important piece of our history.
Yeah, I think they were enormously close. And after his death, I think that was very hard for her. Yeah.
You've described the work, you've mentioned the word cantata. And for our audience, could you please tell us what that is?
Sure, of course. It's a great question. I was thinking how wonderful it is that this is Project1VOICE, because we are literally, not only metaphorically, talking about the voice. So the cantata is from the Latin word to sing, and you sing, of course, using your voice. So a cantata is a longer piece. Margaret Bonds' Ballad of the Brown King is about 25 minutes. So, we think sometimes in terms of songs, especially in our culture, we think a song is, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Cantata is something longer that tells a story. So this is a bit of a storytelling. And it is, the Brown King is the idea that there were the three wise men who came on their camels to visit the infant Jesus. And the idea in the Bible that Langston Hughes and Margaret Bonds zeroed in on, that one of them was a person of color. Ethiopian is the speculation that is in the cantata. So a cantata is chorus and soloists, whom we'll talk about in a moment, and orchestra, telling in 9 movements in this particular piece, this story.
Wow, thank you. So what should audience members expect? You described what the cantata is. We understand the richness of the relationship between Bond and Hughes. So when they come to Carnegie Hall, which is such a hallowed space, and it is, I would think, at the upper echelon of where an artist aspires to perform. And so we're featuring 4 soloists of color. And I believe one of them has quite a unique distinction. Can you tell us about that?
I can tell you. So all 4 of them, as my understanding, will be appearing on the Carnegie Hall main stage for the first time. So this is something I personally am very proud and excited about. We have presented a lot of artists of color, actually, in their Carnegie Hall debut. 2 who may be known to your audience are Julia Bullock, who is a very highly regarded classical singer, and Ryan Speedo Green, who had a book written about him, extraordinary story, sang his first Carnegie Hall concert with us in Verdi Requiem. So, and many others. So these 4 will be making their Carnegie debuts. We'll be talking about them in a moment. But the story you're talking about is Melissa Bonetti, who is our mezzo-soprano soloist. So there are 4 categories: soprano, mezzo-soprano, tenor, and bass, or baritone. And Melissa is from the Dominican Republic, and she did some research, and she came for a rehearsal into my studio, which you see behind me. And she said, I think I'm the first ever Dominican woman to sing classically, to solo classically at Carnegie Hall. So she is thrilled about that.
Bravo.
It's really great. And since she told me that, I wrote to the Dominican embassy, and they responded. They were thrilled. So I think that community is feeling this is really a moment. As you said, Carnegie Hall is a historic place, probably the most famous concert hall in the United States, I think, up there with others all over the world. And in terms of how to answer your question about what audience should expect, I think I want to start with, you should expect to have a good time. I think people kind of go to these, how about that, right?
Yes.
I think, there's this feeling of kind of eat your spinach about, classical music and this kind of event. And that's really not what we're about. And that's not what I want it to feel like. I want it to feel really welcoming. The music is beautiful, all of it. I love the idea that we are accomplishing Bonds' dream of partnering her with Bach. She wanted to be partnered with Bach because she herself loved that music. And it is beautiful music. It's full of light. It's full of energy. Her own cantata tells a very strong story. The soloists are fantastic. I think the best part of my job is that in this apartment, I get to have people, as I did yesterday, like Kirsten, Melissa, and Markel, and I'm sitting at the piano, and we're working together, and I have this incredible singing going on right here. And I will tell you, they sound just great. I mean, if people in your audience heard Kirsten's Tony-nominated performance in Intimate Apparel, they know what she can do. She is so moving. She's a great artist. Melissa, I have worked with in other contexts, as I have with Kirsten. They're both fantastic artists and singers. Markel, I know we actually share a manager, as I do with Melissa. So, it's a small world backstage here. and they're great. And Aaron Crouch, tenor, also very up and coming. So great solo singing, great choral singing, orchestral playing, great music, welcoming environment, happy people. What's not to love?
Exactly. So we should all be running to get our tickets to be there
You bet.
on December 11th. Excellent,
Yes.
excellent. And so we are delighted to have two interviews from two of the soloists that we will be able to enjoy. And I'd like to ask you to please introduce those for us.
Sure. I should make one just clarification that one of the interviews is with Malcolm Merriweather, who's not singing with us.
Okay.
Right. So there are two interviews. One is with Kirsten Piper Brown, and she is, I think I told her this in person yesterday, she is kind of a goddess for me. She's such an expressive singer. And we did have a conversation, which we talk about in this interview, where I said, how is it possible that this is your Carnegie Hall debut, that it hasn't happened yet? And she said, here we are, happy to be doing it together. But so Kirsten is the soprano who is going to be singing with us. She has a very interesting career. We worked together on a project in June, a new opera, something very, very different. Music was really hard. Kirsten was beautifully prepared. We actually met in a very bizarre way because as the opera got underway, I had COVID. So I was listening to rehearsals on Zoom, and I was listening to Kirsten sing over Zoom and thinking, I can't wait to be in the room with her. She's so great. So that was my first encounter with Kirsten, was rehearsing together on Zoom. And then we got together in the room, and I think we had a very good musical connection, and I'm just a huge fan. Then the next interview is Malcolm Merriweather, who I've known of, and our paths have crossed since he was in graduate school, actually. He's very active now as a conductor in New York City and teacher of conducting. And he has been also a real champion of the music of Margaret Bonds. So Malcolm created an arrangement of Bonds's orchestration. Last year, the Cecilia Chorus did Bonds's own orchestration. And there's some challenges with that, which her publisher will need to address. So when we wanted to come back to it, Malcolm, in his own instrumentation, has cleaned up a lot of things and made a really beautiful kind of different version. So Malcolm and I are talking in our interview about his work on Bonds, his interest in Bonds, and his approach to the orchestration.
Wow, beautiful. Well, let's enjoy these two wonderful interviews. I'd like to thank Eric so much for allowing us to have this great conversation. Thank you, Mark, for your artistry and continuing to advance diverse voices in the world of classical music. And thank all of our audience members for watching this. And we look forward to seeing everyone at Carnegie Hall on December 11th at 2 p.m.
See you at Carnegie Hall.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Hi, Malcolm.
Hi, good afternoon.
So I am Mark Shapiro, music director of the Cecilia Chorus of New York, and my guest today is Malcolm Merriweather. I will preface this by saying that the Cecilia Chorus of New York is performing on December 11th of 2022 at 2 p.m. at Carnegie Hall, Malcolm's arrangement of Margaret Bonds' The Ballad of the Brown King. And Malcolm has agreed to talk to us a bit about it, and I invited him to introduce himself. So Malcolm, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Malcolm Merriweather. I am here in Harlem, and I am the music director of the Dessau Choirs. I am also an associate professor at Brooklyn College Conservatoire of Music, and I've been newly appointed the director of the New York Philharmonic Chorus. And I'm so delighted that Cecilia Chorus is performing The Ballad of the Brown King for the second time at Carnegie Hall. Thank you, Mark.
Yes, we are delighted. So since you mentioned that, I'll say that the Cecilia Chorus did do what we know to be the first ever Carnegie Hall performance of this piece a year ago. And then through the help of Michael Cooper, who is a musicologist with a specialty in Margaret Bonds, we found a letter from Margaret Bonds to Langston Hughes, in which who was the librettist for this piece, in which she says that my music deserves to be heard alongside of that of Bach and Handel, or our piece deserves to be heard. So we did it last year with a bit of Handel's Messiah, and we thought, well, she really gave us the opening, so this year we're doing it with Bach, on the idea of fulfill the rest of her dream. So tell us, Malcolm, how did you come to know about this piece?
Well, I'll say that you're absolutely right. I've read a number of Margaret Bonds' letters. And some of them are housed at Yale University. Many of them are down the street from me at the Schomburg Library. And she did indeed see this as a piece to be performed in church, so liturgically alongside Handel's Messiah. So I'm so happy to see this realized again. I first became acquainted with the Ballad of the Brown King in about 2015 after performance of Dr. Ashley Jackson. And Ashley Jackson actually wrote a dissertation about the Ballad of the Brown King. And I was really familiar with the solo vocal works of Margaret Bonds, her spiritual arrangements, the 3 dream portraits, which I had sang during my master's degree. But I wasn't really, I didn't know she wrote a piece for choir and orchestra. So I immediately started digging and got a hold of a copy and decided to perform it with the Dessau choirs.
Great. So let's talk about copy and what the it was. So although I do want to mention Ashley Jackson, whom you mentioned, is also a wonderful harpist who has performed with Cecilia Chorus. And I'm an enormous fan. And she's an amazing player. And amazing, she's also, I think, a music, she works as an executive in some capacities. So she's a person of many, many abilities. But back to Margaret Bonds. So you became aware of the piece, and so you made the arrangement. So tell us about the arrangement and that process, and what it was and what it is in your arrangement.
Sure. Well, Ashley was kind enough to share a photocopy of the piece. The piece is out of print from the publisher, and they're currently giving permission to, photocopy photocopies. And, it was the addition and the arrangement came out of practical matters. The Dessau Choirs is a mid-sized choir, and I wanted to do the piece with instruments. So I decided to, after talking with Ashley, who, as you mentioned, is a harpist, decided to go with this really exquisite instrumentation of the Saint-Saëns Christmas Oratorio, which is harp, strings, and organ, which works really well for a mid-sized choir of about 50 to 60 singers. And after getting permission to do this from the estate of Margaret Bonds and the publisher, we went ahead with it. And really what I did was, from the full orchestration for full orchestra and percussion, it's basically a reduction of that. So it's I don't really even call it an arrangement. It's more of an addition because it is Margaret Bonds. Mm-hmm. I am also an organist, so I sort of heard the organ part as fulfilling the more dramatic sections of the piece where the winds and brass would come in. But most of the string writing is Margaret Bonds. of course, from our performance, our premiere recording, a lot of decisions on bowings and things like that were made by our concertmaster, Kelly Hall Tompkins.
Sure.
So I was really grateful for that insight.
And some of those things found their way into the edition itself, right? Those decisions that you're describing.
Exactly.
Yeah. I had one question I've been fascinated by, having done the piece before and done it from the published edition, was the tempo of the opening movement, which in your edition is slower.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could speak to me about your thought process for that and other such decisions.
Yeah, well, having worked with a number of composers, tempi can range from, there could be quite a range from what is written and what is actually performed.
Sure.
And what I found in that first movement was just a little more relaxed tempo, lended to a more elegant overture, and something a little more in line to the greater architecture of the piece.
Interesting, because I've really been thinking about it because when I came at it, I was thinking, I feel this great responsibility and debt to her. And I'm assuming the published, tempo was okay. That's what she was thinking. And as you say, the other time, of course, we know with composers that maybe not. And I think your recommendation is beautiful. Not sure I would myself have dared to go there, but I think it's really beautiful, and it's kind of nice to have permission. So,
I think that I appreciate the compliment, and there was a lot of insight in this piece from people who actually performed the piece here in Harlem with Margaret Bonds.
Really? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Mrs. Patricia Eaton, who actually just passed away a few weeks ago.
Sorry.
Was a sort of choral stalwart in choral music throughout the city, Harlem School of the Arts, All City Chorus, and founding her own choirs. And I was able to meet with her via her daughter, who is a wonderful singer, Patrice Eaton herself. And we talked about this piece, and that opening movement, I was like, there was a lot of thought that went into it. So she shared with me that it was like, oh, I think this is the perfect tempo. So that's what we went with, especially, and for the recording, there was quite a distance between the organ and the choir and the orchestra.
Yeah.
So there was some practical matters in that as well.
Right, of course, yeah. And our setup will be different. We'll be using a smaller organ and on stage, but yeah. It's
Are you using the electronic organ or a portative?
It's probably more of a smaller portative kind of organ.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
So the choir makes the big moments and strings and harp, and the organ is more supportive. But I was thinking, when you think about the opportunities that people get, and I also work a lot with composers, you can hear so much talent in Margaret Bonds. In this music, I think that with more opportunities to score, she would have rethought some of the wind writing and the brass writing in particular. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, I have performed and will have recorded all of her major cantatas, and you definitely see the growth of Margaret Bonds as an orchestrator, from the Ballad of the Brown King, from the full orchestration to her last piece, Credo. The Dessau Choirs will release that album in February of 2023.
Yeah. Wonderful.
And it's simply magnificent. But you see the growth of that, and she She was actively studying at the Juilliard School with I can't remember his first name, Starer.
Robert Starr, yeah.
Yes,
Right.
who also taught at Brooklyn College, coincidentally.
Yeah.
A predecessor of mine as a choral director there. And yeah, I would agree that that it's certainly an early piece for her.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, or if anyone who's listening is really interested in Margaret Bonds, I was always interested in her voice. Like, what did she sound like as a composer, just her speaking voice? So there's a recording of her doing an interview at the Schomburg Library where you can listen to her, and it's, I don't want to give away anything, but I mean, she has a Midwestern accent and she sounds nothing like I thought she would sound like. But in this interview, she talks about her varied interests, and she cites Darius Milhaud as her favorite composer, which I don't know. It's sort of like, it was a surprise to me to hear her say that. I've done a handful of his pieces, his Trois Opéras Minutes and some other things, but that was quite a shocker. But I think through those experiences of listening to his music and studying, she definitely evolved to credo. And I always say it's so sad that we lost her so soon at the tender age of 59.
Yeah. I know that she died young. And so I was talking to Kirsten Piper Brown, who's our wonderful soprano for this concert. And she shared with me that her teacher knew Margaret Bonds.
Oh.
So one of those amazing things. And when Kirsten was studying, would sort of drop anecdotes about working with Margaret Bonds, and just a real coincidence. And Kirsten has sung it before, actually, in Rochester. I think it's getting a lot of performances in the last couple of years. Yeah. What are do you have thoughts about the text in particular that you want to share with us?
Well, if I could just comment about the Kirsten's teacher and
Sure.
that relationship. I did not know Margaret Bonds, but I have developed quite a nice and close relationship with some of her family members, the heirs to her estate, who are the nieces and nephews of her husband, but also her great niece, Eleanor Boswell, who lives in South Carolina. And she has shared some wonderful stories about Margaret Bonds sitting at the piano and playing piano forehands with her grandmother, and shared some private stories about the relationship of Margaret Bonds and her father, who was quite the Renaissance man himself, an author, a medical doctor, a poet,
What was
preacher.
the title? I know he wrote a book.
It was called Notable Negro Women, I believe.
Right. I remember thinking how extraordinary that his daughter was one of them. But yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And he was a medical doctor.
Yes, he was. He was one of the first Black medical doctors to sort of open a practice in California when he left Chicago.
Right.
So, and a lot of his papers and materials are housed at the Schomburg Library alongside Margaret Bonds.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so special to hear those anecdotes and to have access to those. So I'm glad that Kirsten, I'll have to talk to her about that. I do know her, so I'll have to ask her about that. But the texts. So yeah, this is a really special text. It is, a lot of people ask me about the text, especially because of the sort of social justice charged nature of this text, talking about uplifting Black people. And I'll say that I think everyone should sing this text. It's by a great American poet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, we had a conversation with Desoff about, there's one particular line where the choir sings emphatically, Black like me, Black like me, Black like me. And I said, oh, you can sing it. Don't worry about it. You know, we sing Schubert songs and we're talking about love and this, and we may not be in love or we may, you know, be out of love. We're performing, we're delivering the piece, we're creating that atmosphere for the audience. So I think that it's lovely to see everyone singing this piece. It's so moving to me to, you know, live in Harlem, just down the street from the church where Margaret Bonds was music director for many years, and think about the intention of Margaret Bonds and Langston Hughes to create a cantata that was uplifting, and this is in the letters from Margaret to Langston as well. For young people, she specifically said, we want a piece that's not talking about slaves or this or that, that shows our race, the Negro race, as royalty, as kingship and queenship. And I've talked about this idea of kingship and queenship in music, in art, and how it is so important for young Black people to see those images and to hear these images and or to hear this music, because it can be a bit much to always hear about slavery, you know. Personally, as a performer, I love that this piece is being done so much because it is so uplifting, and the collaboration between Margaret Bonds and Langston was just so beautiful to see. You can see it unfold in the letters, that they embarked on another cantata, Simon Bore the Cross, which is really the same premise. The text is about Simon of Cyrene, who carried the cross of Jesus and is the other sort of dark-skinned identified character in the Bible. So I think that if they had both lived longer, I wonder what they could have done.
Yeah, and they were very close friends, right?
Very close. You can sort of witness the intimacy of their friendship in their letters. It's very, very familiar and very frequent. And we know a lot about Margaret Bonds from Langston Hughes' letters, actually. Yeah,
that's a very touching partnership they had. And just circling back to what you said before, I think we were very excited to use our Carnegie Hall platform for all those reasons that you just said. That, you know, to be able to present this piece as Margaret Bonds said she wanted to Langston Hughes, beside Handel and beside Bach, and in a place like that, I hope she would have been happy about that. And I think we all, you know, both last year and this year, we quite loved the piece. And there is a line that, coming back to the other thing you said, could he have been an Ethiop, this king? That for me is a very resonant line. And I think we've also had these conversations that you described with Desoff about, you know, what can be our path into singing these lines. And, you know, certainly my family is an immigrant family in this country. So, you know, we think a lot about, I think, in groups and out groups, and a question of, I think something that means something to everybody is, was there a place for me? And when I hear that line, I'm so moved by it. You know, is sort of, am I in that story? Could he have been an Ethiop? It's really fantastic. Yeah.
And I'm so glad to hear that, you know, this piece is opening up the space for these conversations. And for these ideas to emerge and unfold as they may. I think Margaret Bonds and Langston Hughes have given us this piece to do just what you are doing with Cecilia Chorus, and just what I've done with Desoff, and just there's a performance that's happening in Sweden with the choir in Sweden. There are 4 performances happening in the United Kingdom of my edition, and at least a dozen or so happening this year in the United States. So I hope that those choirs are having similar conversations.
I'm sure they are. And at the same time, I want to add, I think we're all very aware of the social and cultural context we are in now. At the same time, it's beautiful music. It's so seasonal. You feel it absolutely, how wonderful to be able to celebrate the holidays with music that is this appealing. It's really
absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so glad that your audiences will get to experience, the sort of musical allusions that Margaret put in the Ballad of the Brown King, like the Hallelujah chorus. There's direct sort of rhythmic, not quotations, but allusions to the Hallelujah chorus of Messiah. And we all know that Margaret was a virtuosic pianist. So pairing it with Bach and that virtuosity of the Christmas orator is just, it's going to be exquisite.
Yeah, we're very excited. So anything else that you want to tell us about this piece or your connection with it, Margaret Bonds, Langston Hughes, as we wrap up?
Well, I will just say that that's Credo and Simon Bore the Cross are wonderful pieces that also need to be performed.
I know the Credo, I don't know the Simon,
with wonderful messaging as well. So apropos to where we are socially and where I think we're going in this country. So maybe Cecilia Chorus will do one of those works at Carnegie Hall. We'll see.
I think it's entirely possible. And I would just add, I think it's also, Cecilia Chorus has a pretty long, especially recent history of programming music by women. And I think we shouldn't lose that side of the equation either. That it is so interesting to think of Margaret Bonds as one of a small but very impressive group of 20th century American women. And in our case, also British women, that, Ethel Smythe was a major project of ours. But I often thought, I wonder what they would have made of each other had they met. But I think that from what I've read of Margaret Bonds, she had sort of the double determination and consciousness of all the ways in which she was different and how she needed to communicate how talented she was, given the way that people might not have been receptive to seeing her gifts immediately. Although I think a lot of people must have seen them. And especially, as you said, she was a apparently tremendous pianist. So yeah. But one has
everything.
Yeah, she there's something about her that feels really impressive and kind of awe-inspiring. And it's very exciting to be sort of, for me, always in the proximity of the composer through their work. And then to be able to talk to you about it is really icing on the cake. So thank you so much, Malcolm. I'll stop the recording momentarily. We'll wind up, but good luck with everything you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you in action again very soon.
Thank you, Mark, and good luck with the performance. Thank you, Cecilia Chorus.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello, Kirsten.
Hi, Mark.
So I am Mark Shapiro, music director and conductor of the Cecilia Chorus of New York, in New York. and I have the great pleasure and honor of speaking on Zoom to the extraordinary soprano, Kirsten Piper Brown. Hi, Kirsten. Yeah.
Hi.
So Kirsten will be performing with the Cecilia Chorus of New York on December 11th at 2 p.m. in music by J.S. Bach and Margaret Bonds. Bach's Magnificat and Christmas Oratorio, an excerpt, and then the Ballad of the Brown King by Margaret Bonds on text by Langston Hughes. So enough preamble. We are very excited to work with you, Kirsten, and I think the place to start is I could not believe when you told me this will be your Carnegie Hall main stage debut. That's
Yes.
true, right?
It is, yes. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited.
The honor is all ours. So I have become acquainted with your work in various ways. Of course, I saw Intimate Apparel at Lincoln Center, and you were just amazing. And then you and I had the pleasure of working together on a new opera in June, where you were also amazing. And something I'm realizing when we did that work, our first acquaintance, I was home with COVID and listening to you over Zoom and thinking, she's so good. I can't wait.
Thank you. I was just praying you would get back into the room because I felt a little lost.
Well, we found each other, so it was great.
Yes.
And then as soon as the opera was done, I came running and said, could you do this with us? So I'm just curious, has it been sort of on your bucket list to sing in Carnegie Hall, or yes, no?
Absolutely. I don't know if you know, I'm the chair of the board of directors for the Gateways Music Festival. And the orchestra made its Carnegie Hall debut in April with John Batiste with the world premiere. And I was just sitting in the audience like a proud mother of an orchestra that I kind of helped to bring to Carnegie Hall. And you know, when I walked in there, I said, oh, it would be nice to sing in here, you know, perform here myself. But I never really thought about it. I know that there are things that are going to happen for me. I you know, or places I'm going to perform. And I'd never thought I would sing Bach at Carnegie Hall. And it's just so interesting that you heard me sing this very modern mathematical piece and thought of, hey, you'd be good singing Bach. I thought that was really great of you.
Sure. Thank you. Well, you know, I think it's always interesting to hear, sort of, to try to hear really to the essence of the person. But I think I did ask you also what you thought about your own singing of Bach.
Yeah.
And do you remember what you said or what you would say?
I mean, I don't think I've ever performed Bach live in front of an audience since I was in graduate school at Northwestern. But I remember enjoying and getting that that base of Handel, Bach, and Mozart. I never touched a Puccini or Verdi or anything or a modern piece for quite some time. And so that's what I was fed in many, many years of my early study. And so to come back to it is just, it's wonderful. But once you start doing a lot of modern works and doing, you know, I've done a few Porgy and Besses, a lot of people don't really listen for that. I feel like a lot of people have casted me based upon how I look, quite honestly, and haven't necessarily listened. So I appreciate you listening to my voice.
Well, as I said, both on Zoom and in person, it was a really great experience. And you know, I think one of the reasons you probably do also get cast in new pieces, what I remember working with when we worked together in the opera, is just what a good musician you are. So, you know, you were so prepared and so accurate. I mean, it was really
oh my
amazing.
gosh. Do you remember you asking me if I ever thought about a career in conducting?
Yes.
I laughed. I was like, I fooled him, huh?
You totally did. Yes.
No, thank you so much. It was a wonderful compliment.
Yeah, I think you could, you know, don't rule it out. That's all I'll say.
Watch out. Don't close your eyes. I'm taking your time.
That coming up behind me, right?
No way.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit. And so you mentioned you sang a lot of Bach and Handel and Mozart as a younger singer. For
Yeah.
our listeners who might not think about why somebody would do that,
Mhm.
why would somebody do that, do you think, and what's the value of it, if there is one?
I think it gave me, guess, a good foundation in precision in voice. Singing, and also with being able to, because of course you can, of course, embellish in Bach, but there's this like base that you have to build upon,
Mhm.
and just kind of, gosh, it. Okay, hold on, let me start that over.
Sure.
There's a wonderful precision, um, and sorry, let me start that over. I started off and I just, oh, I almost cursed. Sorry.
Oh, it's all right. We can edit.
Okay.
Mhm.
Singing a lot of Bach, Handel, Mozart, as my early diet in singing gave me a really wonderful base in learning how to use my voice very precisely. And just the style, learning how to embellish within this particular style that seems so very precise, but is still free melodically, but within this, this very specific structure. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes any sense. Before getting into the more romantic pieces where the voice tends to do other things. I'm grateful for my teacher for giving me this baseline of, no, we're going to do this first, and then
Mhm.
we build upon that. And so I felt like I excelled in that, as a young singer, and I always go back to it, even if I'm doing my modern pieces or my more romantic works. I go back to my Mozart Exultate Jubilate, which is just like my little check in.
Yeah,
Can
sure.
I still sing this? Okay, great. A few Bach pieces, Messiahs I do every now and then. Just
Mhm.
making sure that I keep getting booked for those types um, of opportunities as well, which kind of keeps me nice and lined up.
Uh-huh. So tell us a bit about your musical formation and training. Um, I know you went to where for college, you had told me?
So I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
It's historically Black college for women.
Yeah.
And I was actually a little bit of a late bloomer to singing. As far as study, I did take voice lessons, but I was an ethnomusicology major
That's
in
right.
undergrad.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
And I just sang on the side, not ever thinking that I would ever want to sing on a stage. I wanted to do research. I wanted to teach. I wanted to just read books and learn about musical styles, and music culture. And it really wasn't until going into graduate school at Northwestern University, that I studied. And even still, when I left Northwestern with my master's degree, I taught elementary school music for about 2 years. Um, so I wasn't, I wasn't ready. I don't know, but I still took voice lessons locally in the Washington, D.C. area. And
Mhm.
eventually, a friend of mine got me to go to Italy with her for the summer, just as like moral support and to, take lessons as well. But I did really well in that program, and I came back home and started, getting booked um, for singing jobs.
It's really quite a story. I think as I've gotten to know you a bit, um, I think some singers come to the profession and with a very kind of career plan.
Oh yeah, that
Um,
was not me.
yeah, I don't think that is you. And tell us about that.
Yeah, I always I saw myself as a dancer when I was young. I took a lot of ballet. I danced through college actually with my college's dance theater program, where I was a featured dancer at some point. And then that started to conflict with my music major.
Mhm.
And so I kind of gave up dancing slowly. Um, and I always wanted, I never wanted to hate singing. I never wanted it to be stressful. I never wanted it to be a job. And
Mhm.
so I think the way I say it came to me, I was ready to just have a little bit more fun with it. and to just take things as they went. I I still and I still do to this day. I still work in radio as a classical host. I was an editorial assistant for Performance Today at National Public Radio.
Mhm.
And so I was, behind the scenes on the writing staff, and I still love to do so. I think my secret in being successful and not being jaded or anything, and being, you know, a good colleague and being happy on the job is that I just don't really see it as a job.
Mhm.
I mean, I do, but I see it as, wow, I get to do this and I get to give a gift to the audience and I
Mhm.
get to receive a gift from the audience. Um, and that's just kind of how I have to approach it. So I'm not stressed out about, oh, I don't have enough bookings for this, or, I find other things to do. I have two wonderful children that keep me very busy.
Mhm.
If I happen
Old
to
are
not
you?
be singing, they're 8 and 11, and they're both musicians, pianist and a violinist.
Very nice.
So I'm very much fulfilled musically at home by
Mhm.
their musical engagements as well. And so I'm just trying to have a good time and making sure that others have a good time too when I sing. And I
That's
think that's what's worked for me.
Mhm. That's very nice. And something I was thinking I wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
I know you've done a great deal of work in the theater.
Mhm.
Um, how do you feel about sacred repertoire like Bach? Do you make a distinction?
Mhm.
Is that coming from a different place for you? What
Yes.
do you think?
Um, I love singing sacred repertoire. I'm doing one of my first sacred recitals next year at a large church here in Rochester, New York, where I am. I'm very
Mhm.
excited about that. I am Christian. I grew up the great knowledge of biblical text,
Mhm.
and so an opportunity to sing settings of those texts is just a way to kind of um, amplify my own experience spiritually, and another way to share or minister,
Mhm.
um, if you so. So I see that as an opportunity, and because of my belief and my belief system, I feel that I do well interpreting the text because I believe them.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I find it a great opportunity and honor to be able to do that.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Um, I think you told me that Margaret Bonds was a name that you knew.
Yes.
And how did you come to know it?
hmm So in that time where I was pretending like I didn't want to be a singer, I graduated from college. I was working at National Public Radio. I studied with a woman named Charlotte Holloman. She made her career mostly in Germany, as many Black American singers of her time did, could not necessarily find work in the United States. And so when she retired from singing, she came back to Washington, D.C., taught at Catholic University and Howard University, and taught privately. And I was able to study with her. And she gave me a bunch of Margaret Bonds songs, spiritual settings, and some of them look like they were even handwritten, just manuscript. And I asked her about these pieces, and she said, "Oh, she and we used to hang out." And so I was like, "Wow."
Mhm.
So just kind of learning from her, who learned directly from Margaret Bonds. And of course, now I think many of us are learning a little bit more about her,
Yeah,
fortunately. But I also sang a bit of her repertoire, her spiritual settings, when I was in college at Spelman.
that's extraordinary. I don't think I realized that your teacher had actually worked with Bonds personally.
Yes, she did.
That is really something. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Did she have any stories about Bonds that you could share that you remember?
I don't remember
Yeah.
many. I do remember her being, I think she told a story of being in Chicago with her,
Mhm.
and Langston Hughes actually, let's talk about Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes coming over, and I wonder what they were working on. No, I was kidding.
Yeah, interesting.
Many things that she said, many of Langston Hughes' works, but
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think that was, I kind of like big eyes when she was telling about, sitting in the kitchen with Margaret Bonds and Langston Hughes. I would have loved to been a fly on the wall, just see what was going on. What were they talking about? What were they writing?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't remember many. I mean, she just had so many different stories, but they were throwaways for her, like, oh yeah, I did that.
Yeah, they seem to have had extraordinary chemistry, Bonds and you.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
really good partnership.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about this particular text of the ballad.
Um, I've this will be my second time singing it. My debut in this piece was with Syracuse Opera last around this holiday. Um, it really does. It's just a sweet text,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so endearing and charming. And I believe that Margaret Bonds just did a wonderful job with the musical setting. Um, and it's a nice way to tell another side of the story. Another side of the Christmas story. And I'm just so grateful to have the piece and the writing and what Langston Hughes was able to bring to the story of the birth of Jesus. So I'm so glad that it's getting done
Well,
more often.
we're thrilled to be doing it. We're thrilled to be doing it with you.
Yay.
And we hope our audience will come and discover you in your Carnegie Hall debut. Anybody who heard you at Lincoln Center or did not, I am here to tell you that Kirsten Piper Brown is one of a kind and should not be missed, and we can't wait.
Thank you.
So, Kirsten, thank you so much. I'll switch off the recording.
Okay. Thank you. That was fun.
Wow. Wow, that was pretty amazing. Thank you, Donna, Mark, Kristen, and Malcolm for joining us today on Project One Voice Live. Just to reiterate a little bit of what you just heard. So on Sunday, December 11th, the Harlem Arts Alliance chairman, Voza Rivers, is proud to announce the return of Harlem Celebrates Harlem this holiday season with the Cecilia Chorus of New York. Now, Mark Shapiro is the music director. Together, they will present at Carnegie Hall the premiere of the Ballad of the Brown King, a Christmas cantata. This piece is by American composer Margaret Bonds, with text by Langston Hughes and orchestrations by Malcolm J. Merriweather, along with Bach's Magnificat and Part 5 of his Christmas oratorio. I love the way that Mark says Bach. I love that. The concert will be held on Sunday, December 11th at 2 p.m. in Stern Auditorium at Carnegie Hall. Now, for tickets, visit CeciliaChorusNY.org. Now, to find out more about what we do at Project One Voice, visit our website at project1voice.org. Please follow us on social media at Project One Voice. And so there you have it. So I will see you hopefully on Sunday, December 11th at Carnegie Hall at 2 p.m. for the Ballad of the Brown King. Please be sure, as always, to support and engage with Black creativity in your part of the country. That's it for me and Project One Voice Live. Thank you. Have a fantastic, fantastic holiday season and have an incredible day. So that's it. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you next time on Project One Voice Live. Have a good one. Bye-bye.